Hey guys, it's Sai. If you're super curious but don't always have the time to watch your favorite podcasts, you found the right place. Here's your summary of Fridman number 392 with Joscha Bach, a leading cognitive scientist, AI researcher, and philosopher. In less time than it takes to pray to the AI overlords, let's jump in. Joscha Bach got his PhD in cognitive science from the German school, Osnabrück University, in 2006. He has worked at Harvard's Evolutionary Dynamics program, MIT's Media Lab, and been the vice president of the AI Foundation, which teaches AI to learn more sophisticated, human-like interactions. Despite his background in computer science and AI, he has written papers in philosophy and started to bring those ideas to social media platforms like X, where he often riffs about current trends, but also posts about consciousness, free will, and the nature of reality. If you were looking for something to think about for the next, 30 years, this might be what you're looking for.
Here's another cool thing I love about journaling.
Lucidity is the clarity of expression. In this context specifically, the clarity of self-expression throughout one's life, in relation to the reality they live in. Joscha created a list in which, throughout a person's life, they will express varying degrees of lucidity. He then roughly relates each level to a stage in human development. Ranging from infant to fully formed adult, he postulates that some people might never reach certain stages. Some people will be stuck in their own mind.
You wrote a post about levels of lucidity. Quote, as we grow older, it becomes apparent that our self-reflexive mind is not just gradually accumulating ideas about itself, but that it progresses in somewhat distinct stages. So there's 7 of the stages. Stage 1, reactive survival, infant. Stage 2, personal self, young child. Stage 3, social self, adolescence, domesticated adult. Stage 4 is rational agency, self-direction. Stage 5 is self-authoring. That's full adult. You've achieved wisdom, but there's 2 more stages. Stage 6 is enlightenment. Stage 7 is transcendence. Can you explain each, or the interesting parts of each of these stages? And what's your sense why there are stages of lucidity as we progress through life in this too short life?
This model is derived from a concept by the psychologist Robert Kegan, and he talks about the development of the self as a process that happens in principle by some kind of reverse engineering of a mind, where you gradually become aware of yourself and thereby build structure that allows you to interact deeper with the world and yourself. And I found myself using this model not so much as a developmental model. I'm not even sure if it's a very good developmental model, because I saw my children not progressing exactly like that. And I also suspect that you don't go through these stages necessarily in succession, and it's not that you work through one stage and then you get into the next one. Sometimes you revisit them, sometimes stuff is happening in parallel. But it's, I think, a useful framework to look at what's present in the structure of a person and how they interact with the world and how they relate to themselves. It's more like a philosophical framework that allows you to talk about how minds work. And at first, when we are born, we don't have a personal self yet, I think. Instead, we have an attentional self. And this attentional self is initially in the infant tasked with building a world model and also an initial model of the self. But mostly it's building a game engine in the brain that is tracking sensory data and uses it to explain it. And in some sense, you could compare it to a game engine like Minecraft or so colors and sounds. People are all not physical objects. They are a creation of our mind at a certain level of coarse graining, models that are mathematical, that use geometry and that use manipulation of objects and so on to create scenes in which we can find ourselves and interact with them. And this personal self is something that is more or less created after the world is finished, after it's trained into the system, after it has been constructed. And this personal self is an agent that interacts with the outside world.
But how does one create their own mind? How do we create a mind after we begin to live in it? That seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Shouldn't the mind come before the person? The chicken before the egg? Or is there nothing but the person? The conscience, from which we form every sensation, from sound to sight, the smell of fresh baked cookies on a midsummer day, to the profanity-inducing pain of stepping on a Lego. Does the mind dream it all up?
the outside world is not the world of quantum mechanics, not the physical universe, but it's the model that has been generated in our own mind, right? And this is us, and we experience ourselves interacting with that outside world that is created outside of our own mind. And outside of ourselves, there's feelings, and they presented our interface to this outside world. They pose problems to us. These feelings are basically attitudes that our mind is computing that tell us what's needed in the world, the things that we are drawn to, the things that we are afraid of. And we are tasked with solving this problem of satisfying the needs, avoiding the aversions, following on our inner commitments, and so on, and also modeling ourselves and building the next stage.
In some sense, things make sense, right? You know this subconsciously, if not consciously. We know that we are. We know that being is all that we can fundamentally prove, to ourselves at least. We know that our experience is the only one we have, and it resides with us, not inside of us. We are not the body that holds a metaphysical consciousness inside it. We are the body and the conscience. We are both that which interacts and is in the world we perceive. And not only that, we change all the time. I mean really all the time, from day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute. Do you want pizza for breakfast?
I want the pizza now.
Well, duh. Cold pizza is arguably the pinnacle of hangover food.
What took you so long?
Thanks, you son of a bitch.
You know, revenge is a dish best served cold, Jack. Like sashimi or pizza.
You prefer cold pizza?
The morning after, it's the best.
Better than hot pizza? That's insane.
You don't tell me what kind of pizza to like. You don't tell me anything anymore, Jack.
But what about for lunch too? Yeah, maybe. You could convince yourself to have it again. Pizza is pretty damn good. But what about for dinner? Probably not, right? You probably don't want pizza again 6 hours after you ate it for breakfast. And then again for lunch. But what's the difference between choosing to eat pizza and choosing to be mad, sad, happy?
You look like a pansy. Shut up, Kyle. What are you supposed to be? I'm Raggedy Andy. Why the hell did you dress up like Raggedy Andy, dude? Wendy's going as Raggedy Ann, and she said this way we'd win the costume contest for sure. No way, dude. I'm gonna win the costume contest with this sweet Chewbacca costume. Wendy said that first prize is 2 tons of candy. Wow, cool. Hey, dude. Carmen, what kind of costume is that?
Now I know what you're thinking. Here we go, you're going to tell me how I can control my emotions by doing a lot of woo-woo magic. Well, yeah. Hold the woo-woo part, though, and magic. It's far from either of those. Here, give me 10 seconds of your time. Okay, not even 10 seconds, give me 5. Now let's play a game. I'll be on team 1 and you'll be on team 2. Since I got to pick which team I am, you get to go first. Ready? Go. Are you going to do anything? You're probably staring at your screen really confused right now. Look at your face in the reflection. You look so funny, just sitting there dazed. See how nothing happened? See how if you don't create rules to play by, nothing happens? Well, not nothing. You still existed, right? You were still experiencing the game we were playing despite nothing happening. Okay, what's the difference between then and now? Rules.
And this is to remind us that I don't like rules. And Teddy doesn't like rules either.
Right now, there are rules being carried out by your abstraction of the senses you're sensing. Here. I'll say it this way. You're hearing my words and seeing the cool little videos on the screen, but the lack of rules didn't stop you from being. In the same way your mind is. It also creates the rules of the game to play by, but when it's not creating rules, that doesn't mean you cease to exist. You exist all right. You exist with that silly face, staring at the silly little screen. But then after I made fun of you, you might have gotten a little angry. You probably were a little confused too, and both of those states of being were created by the is that you are. All apart from the reaction you had after the fact. As Joscha would put it, it's as if you put on a costume in response to the world, in this case the fun game we played. And you can control those costumes.
You realize that identity in interpersonal interaction is a costume, and you should be able to have agency over that costume, right? It's useful to wear a costume. It tells something to others, and it allows to interface in roles. But being locked into this is a big limitation.
The word costume kind of implies that it's fraudulent in some way. Is costume a good word for you? Like
No.
we present ourselves to the world.
In some sense, I learned a lot about costumes at Burning Man. Before that, I did not really appreciate costumes and saw them more as uniforms, like wearing a suit if you are working in a bank or if you are trying to get startup funding from a VC in Switzerland. Right, then you dress up in a particular way. And this is mostly to show the other side that you are willing to play by the rules and you understand what the rules are. There is something deeper. When you are at Burning Man, your costume becomes self-expression and there is no boundary to the self-expression. You're basically free to wear what you want, to express other people what you feel like this day and what kind of interactions you want to have.
Is the costume a kind of projection of who you are?
That's very hard to say because the costume also depends on what other people see in the costume. And this depends on the context that the other people understand. And so you have to create something, if you want to, that is legible to the other side. And that means something to yourself.
Do we become prisoners of the costume? Because everybody expects us
Some people do. But I think that once you realize that you wear a costume at Burning Man, a variety of costumes, realize that you cannot not wear a costume.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, everything that you wear and present to others is something that is to some degree in addition to what you are deep inside.
Now that we both know we wear costumes, which one are you going to put on? Hell, which one am I going to put on? And what even causes us to choose which costume we put on? Because we have to choose, right? If we didn't meet and you would be wearing the same costume. But that isn't the case. Not 10 minutes ago, you were wearing the costume of a clown and I was wearing the costume of a schoolyard bully. And even then, I didn't fully choose to be a schoolyard bully. Your reaction to our game transformed my innocent game playing costume into that of a bully. But what if you're the bully and I'm the clown? Or what if we are both the bully and the clown?
The difference between people who vote for different parties and might have very different opinions and different value systems is often the accident of where they are born and what happened after that to them and what traits they got before they were born. And at some point you realize a perspective where you understand that everybody could be you in a different timeline. When you are wearing your pajamas and you switch out of your pajamas into, say, a work shirt and pants, you're making a costume change, right? And if you are putting on a gown, you're making a costume change.
And you could do the same with personality?
You could, if that's what you're into. There are people which have multiple personalities for interaction in multiple roles, right? So if somebody works in a store and you put up a storekeeper personality, when you're working, when you're presenting yourself at work, you develop a sub-personality for this. And the social persona for many people is in some sense a puppet that they're playing like a marionette. And if they play this all the time, they might forget that there is something behind this. There's something what it feels like to be in your skin. I believe it's regrettable that we do not use the opportunities that we have with custom-made clothing now to wear costumes that are much more stylish, that are much more custom-made, that are not necessarily part of a fashion in which you express which milieu you're part of and how up-to-date you are, but you also express how you are as an individual and what you want to do today and how you feel today and what you intend to do about it.
Well, isn't it easier now in the digital world to explore different costumes? I mean, that's the kind of idea with virtual reality. That's the idea, even with Twitter and two-dimensional screens. You can swap all costumes. You can be as weird as you want.
At some point, you can collapse the division between a personal self and world generator again. And a lot of people get there via meditation, or some of them get there via psychedelics, some of them by accident. And you suddenly notice that you are not actually a person, but you are a vessel that can create a person. And the person is still there. You observe that personal self, but you observe the personal self from the outside. And you notice it's a representation. And you might also notice that the world that is being created is a representation. If not, then you might experience that I am the universe. I am the thing that is creating everything. And of course, what you're creating is not quantum mechanics and the physical universe. What you're creating is this game engine that is updating the world, and you're creating your valence, your feelings, and all the people inside of that world, including the person that you identify with yourself in this world.
Are you creating the game engine, or are you noticing the game engine?
You noticed how you're generating the game engine. And I mean, when you are dreaming at night, you can if you have a lucid dream, you can learn how to do this deliberately. And in principle, you can also do it during the day. And the reason why we don't get to do this from the beginning and why we don't have agency of our feelings right away is because we would game it before we have the necessary amount of wisdom to deal with creating this dream that we are in. You live your life in the mode that works best at any given moment. And when your mind decides that you should have a different configuration, then it's building that configuration. And for many people, they stay happily at state 3 and experience themselves as part of groups. And there's nothing wrong with this. And for some people, this doesn't work and they're forced to build more agency over their rational beliefs than this and construct their norms rationally.
So the clown costume you wore and the bully costume I wore were both costumes we imposed on each other and ourselves simultaneously. God, that's weird. I guess we are both conscious. Or I'm at least conscious. And I bet you believe you're conscious. But are our consciousnesses different? They are both just observers. They both have no rules at bottom, just observing the abstractions of our being, with no judgment. Pure experience. So, are we both one? Are we the same thing? The same thing, but with different cards dealt at the start of it all. If I was put in your shoes and you were put in mine, would we each be each other, exactly? Is everyone, everybody? Getting back to the fun game we played, why did you react the way you did? Was it because you felt betrayed? Was your ego hurt? Did you assume what I was going to do and then have those assumptions pulled out from under you? Do you think I did that in sadistic fashion because I think it's funny to watch you be confused? The most fundamental form of suffering, the loss of direction, the psychological disorientation of the story of your life, even if for just a brief 5 seconds. But what if there was a way to view this relationship between what I did and how you reacted in a way that will allow you to not throw out so many F-bombs at the next guy who cuts you off in traffic? What if the next time someone wrongs you, you could view it in a light where you don't get angry or sad for any longer than you have to?
You tweeted, quote, suffering results for one part of the mind failing at regulating another part of the mind. Suffering happens at an early stage of mental development. I don't think that superhuman AI would suffer. What's your intuition there?
The philosopher Thomas Metzinger is very concerned that the creation of superhuman intelligence would lead to superhuman suffering.
Yeah.
And so he's strongly against it. And personally, I don't think that this happens because suffering is not happening at the boundary between ourself and the physical universe. It's not stuff on our skin that makes us suffer. It happens at the boundary between self and world, right? And the world here is the world model. It's the stuff that is created by your mind.
But that's
the
all
representation of how the universe is and how it should be and how you yourself relate to this. And at this boundary is where suffering happens. So suffering in some sense is self-inflicted, but not by your personal self. It's inflicted by the mind on the personal self that experiences itself as you.
All right, so as we learned earlier, we are both the mind and the body, and the actual feeling of suffering is just an imposed reaction from our mind to our physical body, which then makes it easier to suffer faster the next time suffering could happen. The floor for suffering lowers. If continued endlessly, you would suffer even when you are doing things you know you liked. Things at your core you know you should enjoy and take immense pleasure in doing. Maybe it's reading a book, running, playing guitar. These are all things people like doing. People like learning, like exerting themselves physically, playing music. There are people in our society who do these things as their job, and they love it. They physically and mentally love doing it. So why isn't that you? You are a person. You were born into this world of a mother and father, just as they were. What is stopping you from enjoying your activity of fulfillment as much as someone who does it for a living? If you could, wouldn't you want to do the thing you're so passionate about as a living? Well, where's the difference?
You can turn off suffering when you are able to get on this outer level. So when you manage to understand how the mind is producing pain and pleasure and fear and love and so on, then you can take charge of this and you get agency of whether you suffer. Technically, what pain and pleasure is, they are learning signals, right? A part of your brain is sending a learning signal to another part of the brain to improve its performance. And sometimes this doesn't work because this trainer who sends the signal does not have a good model of how to improve the performance. So it's sending a signal, but the performance doesn't get better. And then it might crank up the pain. And it gets worse and worse. And the behavior of the system may be even deteriorating as a result. But until this is resolved, this regulation issue, your pain is increasing. And this is, I think, typically what you describe as suffering. So in this sense, you could say that pain is very natural and helpful, but suffering is the result of a regulation problem in which you try to regulate something that cannot actually be regulated. And that could be resolved if you would be able to get at the level of your mind where the pain signal is being created and rerouted and improve the regulation. And a lot of people get there, right? If you are a monk who is spending decades reflecting about how their own psyche works, you can get to the point where you realize that suffering is really a choice, and you can choose how your mind is set up.
Do we really have to go to the monasteries in India and learn the Vedic traditions while sitting bald, unmoving, and free of being attached to one's thoughts in order to take control of our emotions? Not exactly. They may have the pinnacle of the ability. But in the same way that Roger Gracie is the greatest Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter of all time, new people still learn jiu-jitsu and get really good at it. The benefits reaped from understanding that your emotions are simply an imposed way of being that you have submissively come to accept and even rationalize many times per day is inconceivably transformational than having no conception at all. You don't have to walk for very long to get some of the same benefits of running, or eat perfectly at every meal to start to lose weight and feel healthier. The amount of benefit you get from any of these understandings are exactly proportional to that of the effort you put in.
Learn what happens to clowns who try to run. I want you to do it.
I'd rather you do it.
So, bringing home the things we've learned so far, our being is that of a universal, in the literal and metaphorical sense, ironically enough, state that abstracts the information we receive. And to some extent, we even get to control how those data points or senses are abstracted and how we react. This can be one of the most eye-opening revelations a person can undergo in all of experience. We are what we make ourselves to be, in every instance. But at what point can this be replicated? At what point can we deconstruct the processes in our own being that makes up conscious awareness and replicate it? Here, I mean in the purely physical sense. Can we, from the bottom up, construct being, systems that abstract and react accordingly? Lex postulates similarly.
Do you think GPT-N can achieve consciousness?
Well, GPT-N probably. It's not even clear for the present systems. When I talk to my friends at OpenAI, they feel that this question, whether the models currently are conscious, is much more complicated than many people might think. I guess that it's not that OpenAI has a homogeneous opinion about this. There's some aspects to this. One is, of course, this language model has written a lot of text in which people were conscious or described their own consciousness, and it's emulating this. And if it's conscious, it's probably not conscious in a way that is close to the way in which human beings are conscious. While it is going through these states and going through a 100-step function that is emulating adjacent brain states that require a degree of self-reflection, it can also create a model of an observer that is reflecting itself in real time and describe what that's like. And while this model is a deepfake, our own consciousness is also as if it's virtual, right? It's not physical. Our consciousness is a representation of a self-reflexive observer that only exists in patterns of interaction between cells. So it is not a physical object in the sense that exists in base reality, but it's really a representational object that develops its causal power only from a certain modeling perspective.
It's virtual.
Yes. And so to which degree is the virtuality of the consciousness in ChatGPT more virtual and less causal than the virtuality of our own consciousness?
As Joscha points out, our instantiations of being seem to be at the very least different from those that we are trying to manufacture in AI systems. We have physical causal ability to manipulate our material world, and even our metaphysical world through the space of ideas. But are current AI models not doing similar things? They may not yet have the capacity to build buildings or water flowers. But at what point do they? Do we not ask them questions or simply talk to them and then receive answers that change our journey through the space of ideas? Do we not then take those ideas, in part based on these AI systems, and then causally change our physical world? How much of that is due to the AI system's influence over our ideas? And how close are those systems to being able to build upon themselves, just like we do as small infants, before we have conception of self?
I don't know if the language model is the right paradigm, because it is doing too much. It's giving you too much. And it's hard, once you have too much, to take away from it again. The way in which our own mind works is not that we train a language model in our own mind, and after the language model is there, we build a personal self on top of it that then relates to the world. There is something that is being built, right? There is a game engine that is being built. There is a language of thought that is being developed that allows different parts of the mind to talk to each other. And this is a bit of a speculative hypothesis that this language of thought is there, but I suspect that it's important for the way in which our own minds work. And building these principles into a system might be a more straightforward way to a first-person AI. So to something that first creates an intentional self and then creates a personal self. So the way in which this seems to be working, I think, is that when the game engine is built in your mind, it's not just following gradients where you are stimulated by the environment and then end up with having a solution to how the world works. I suspect that building this game engine in your own mind does require intelligence. It's a constructive task where at times you need to reason. And this is a task that we are fulfilling in the first years of our life. So during the first year of its life, an infant is building a lot of structure about the world that does inquire experiments and some first principles reasoning and so on. And in this time, there is usually no personal self. There is a first-person perspective, but it's not a person. This notion that you are a human being that is interacting in a social context and is confronted with an immutable world, in which objects are fixed and can no longer be changed, in which the dream can no longer be influenced, is something that emerges a little bit later in our life. And I personally suspect that this is something that our ancestors had known and we have forgotten. Because I suspect that it's there in plain sight in Genesis 1, in this first book of the Bible, where it's being described that this creative spirit is hovering over the substrate and then is creating a boundary between the world model and sphere of ideas, earth and heaven, as they're being described there. And then it's creating contrast, and then dimensions, and then space. And then it creates organic shapes and solids and liquids and builds a world from them and creates plants and animals, gives them all their names. And once that's done, it creates another spirit in its own image, but it creates it as man and woman, as something that thinks of itself as a human being and puts it into this world. And the Christians mistranslate this, I suspect, when they say this is the description of the creation of the physical universe by a supernatural being. I think this is literally a description of how in every mind a universe is being created as some kind of game engine by a creative spirit, our first consciousness that emerges in our mind even before we are born. And that creates the interaction between organism and world. And once that is built and trained, the personal self is being created, and we only remember being the personal self. We no longer remember how we created the game engine.
So God, in this view, is the first creative mind in the
It's the first consciousness. And
in the early days, in the early months of development.
And it's still there. You still have this outer mind that creates your sense of whether you're being loved by the world or not, and what your place in the world is. Right? It's something that is not yourself that is producing this. It's your mind that does it. So there is an outer mind that basically is an agent that determines who you are with respect to the world. And while you are stuck being that personal self in this world until you get to stage 6 and you destroy the boundary, right? And we all do this, I think, earlier in small glimpses. And maybe sometimes we can remember what it was like when we were a small child and get some glimpses into how it's been. But for most people, that rarely happens.
Just glimpses.
We go through life wondering, why? Why do we do the things we do? For what reason must we continue to do so? How much of where we are is because of us, and how much of it is due to things we cannot control? These answers seem so vital to being a human. To being. It is hard to think about a way in which someone can live all the years of their life and not ask questions parallel in aim. For some people, these questions are asked so much that they devote their life to the chance of being able to find insight, while others are fine going about their day, kissing their daughter on the cheek before sending her away on the bus while drinking a warm cup of coffee. It's very easy to get caught up in the differences between each way of being. It's very easy, especially for those who pursue knowledge, to put themselves on pedestals, preaching transcendence. But at the very end of it all, and even from the beginning, these two ways of being aren't very different. The experience of fulfillment a scientist gets when pondering the metaphysical relationships of the universe is a response to a sense, a culmination of senses that produce a reaction, one that we can even learn to control. But the man kissing his daughter on the cheek and drinking that warm, cozy hug we call coffee first thing in the morning can experience exactly the same feeling. From a totally different set of stimuli, one is not better than the other. In some sense, they aren't even different. They are reactions we have to stimuli. And to whether or not we can recreate these experiences through bottom-up reconstructions of systems is something that can only be answered by people who know way more than me. Regardless, if you take nothing away from this conversation, at least take this. We are. And we have control over what we are. In relation to ourselves, others, and even the things we interact with. They all feed us. They all feed our being. So, be great. Be caring and kind. Don't submissively corner yourself into ways of being that maximize suffering, for you or for others. It's the only way to really be in accordance with that which is good. I hope you learned something today. And if you made it this far, be proud. Be proud that you are curious and want to learn. Never lose that. The sense of wonder to that which is above you, to that which you don't know or aren't sure of. Not everyone has that. But tending to that desire to learn is not only the most fulfilling thing you can do, but is nothing short of revelatory. Because behind the screen is you, and you alone. Does that scare you? Stay curious.